Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm delighted that we're joined today by Lia Raquel Neves, who is the founder of EITIC Consulting. Now, if that sounds a bit like ethics, that's because it is related to ethics. So, welcome, Lia. Can you please tell us a little bit about EITIC, what you're doing, and a bit of your background, and how ethics and what you're doing relates to disability? Because obviously, we talk a lot on Access Chat about disability inclusion and accessibility, etc. So, welcome to the show.
Hello, so my name is Lia. I live in Lisbon, in Portugal. I'm a light-skinned woman with a straight, short, length dark brown hair. I wear glasses. I have brown eyes. I'm 1 meter and 69 centimeters tall. Today I'm wearing a light brown blazer with a white t-shirt. I'm in an indoor space with a neutral background, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. What I can say about my journey. So, my journey into AI ethics began with a background in philosophy where I developed critical thinking and an ethical lens that continues to guide my work today. And later, I pursue a master's degree in public health focus on bioethics, which gave me a very practical understanding how ethical dilemmas play out in science, medicine, and technology. Eventually, I moved into consulting where I encountered more agile environments and real challenges that organizations face, particularly around AI governance, accessibility, and bias mitigation. That is what led me to found EITIC to help companies and institutions bring ethics into action, not just a branding exercise or a legal requirement. So to me, AI ethics is it's just not about complying with the AI Act or the Accessibility Act. It is about ensuring that technology serves people fairly, inclusively, and responsibly. But I think that this starts by recognizing that technology is not neutral. It reflects values, choices, and even the absence of those who design it. And I've tried to bring this perspective into projects I have worked on, or from conferences like Collision and Web Summit to talk about co-creating inclusive policies with a range of stakeholders. Because at the end of the day, ethics it's not about doing what is right. It's about making it work it on practice. But one thing is this issue of disability and diversity has always been part of my life. I grew up with an education embraced difference, but also with an educated awareness of the barriers that surround us. My grandmother, for instance, part of her vision gradually due to glaucoma, and my wife has a keratoconus, that degenerative eye condition. And these and other experiences gave me a very direct understanding of challenges that go far behind physical barriers, encompassing accessibility in healthcare, transport, social integration, and of course fundamental rights. By coincidence or not, I start my career in research, always working at the intersection of health, technology, and social sciences. And one of the most transformative projects I was involved. It was called Intimacy and Disability. It was there that I began exploring the social model of disability from Michael Oliver and came to face with the structural problems that we have, from the lack of research on hate crimes against disabled people to the absence of medical training tailored to the specific needs. And one of the main recommendations of that project over a decade ago remains relevant today. The need of the expand of rehabilitation services, assistive technologies, and support for independent living. And in 2021, for instance, I have worked with an NPO entirely run by people with multiple disabilities, promoting the independent living philosophy. They every their reality Portugal was extremely difficult from the lack of access to personal assistance and often unaffordable to absence of basic accessible tools,
I was interested by your statement that technology isn't neutral, right? And quite often people say that technology is neutral. It's the application of technology that isn't. So I was interested for you to say that you actually thought that technology itself wasn't neutral. So I think that, like with AI, right? There are structural issues with AI, but you can apply it for either good purposes or ill intent, right? So I guess where in your statement, so how is it that you think there is this lack of neutrality in technology itself, or is it in the application?
This is a tricky question, because I think I believe that emerging technologies can be powerful and transformative innovation, and can expand the possibilities, but only if they don't reproduce or amplify old exclusions. That is where ethics and governance frameworks become essential, not to slow things down, but to make sure we are not leaving people behind. Ethics governance frameworks is a system of policies, procedures, and structures that promote ethical behavior in an organization. Technology is not neutral, in my perspective, not in action.
No, no, not in action. No, but I mean, and I think that to a certain extent, also our implicit biases and our experiences shape us in how we're creating technology. But again, the actions that we take can, we can be informed through ethics into how we design technology. And also, when you were mentioning about the difference between ethics and compliance, it's usually the ethical thinking that gets you to the point of the formulation of the guidelines and the regulations and so on. So I know that Deborah's itching to ask a question, but maybe the last little thing is around, you were talking about bias in what are some of the things that you've been working on that are addressing those biases, and then I'll hand over to Deborah.
We have been talking about ethics and conscious and unconscious bias and AI and technology for as long as I've been in the field. I know Neil and Antonio, we've had many conversations in Access Chat about this. But what I don't know, and and when I think about it too much, Leah, it makes me nervous. Have we gotten better because of everything we've tried to do to raise the awareness about it? I know we haven't done enough, but have we made progress? I'd like to think we have because I'm internally optimistic. But I would just add that to Neil's question too. Thanks.
Thank you. So we can spend here all the weekend talking about this. But I want to highlight one point about this. We have done a lot of advances related to technology, guidelines, WACA guidelines, etc. Must always keep in mind that multiple institutions operate in this space, from national market of surveillance authorities to the European Commission, through the AI office, and the European Protection Supervisor, for instance. On top of that, each country brings its own regulatory and implemented context, which can lead to inconsistencies across the countries. So even acknowledging the efforts of the regulators, I still find it difficult to understand why certain ethical gaps persist. During the drafting of the AI Act, the European Disability Forum, for instance, and other advocacy groups, of course, repeatedly emphasize the importance of a human-centered approach, one that truly reflects the motto, nothing about us without us. And as I learned early in my career, there is a big difference between making policies with people and making policies for people, like technology. Now, uh, we look at the intersection between AI Act and Accessibility Act. We see ethical challenges on operational, legal, and social forms. Although both aim to safeguard, of course, fundamental rights, I think they are not fully aligned. I think this disconnect compromises digital inclusion. But one key operational issue is that AI hack doesn't explicitly define accessibility as a risk factor. Even systems that have a major impact on disabled users, like employment or education, might not be flagged as a high risk. And that is not just a legal oversight, it's an ethical failure in my view. I mean, without clear incentives or harmonized standards, accessibility can fall off the priority list. Not necessarily out of bad intent. I'm not saying this, but because it's not structurally required. This is how we end up with interfaces like virtual assistants or facial recognition tools that exclude people with disabilities. But of course, there are also legal complexity. If you usually do these kind of questions, if an AI system causes harm, who is the responsible? The developer, the provider, the operator. So this fragmentation can make accountability more difficult. And let's not forget the Accessibility Act, while robust in many areas, doesn't fully cover emerging AI systems like adaptive machine learning or voice-based platforms. Even AI is used to assess accessibility, for instance, scanning websites for WCAG compliance. We must consider privacy, transparency, and false positives. These are real risks. It reminds me of accessibility overlays, tools that promises to fix everything, but often why deeper systematic accessibility failures. It's used to call this accessibility washing. I don't know if I answered your question, but what I can say is accessibility can be a last minute fix. It needs to be embedded from the start with a direct involvement of people with disabilities across the entire development life cycle. Ethics and accessibility are not two separate concerns. If we want AI to serve society fairly, accessibility must become a core compliance and design principle, not a decorative layer.
Antonio, I know you had a question.
Well, I think one of the big difficulties that we have here is that we are, particularly with AI, is we are using a new technology that comes into the hands of a consumer, of the hands of every one of us. But then not even those who created the systems know where the data is coming from. They don't. It's not just they don't know where the data is coming from. Is also that the data has an history, that can go back 20 years, 30 years, sometimes even more. And it's not really possible to make historical data ethical. It's basically impossible. And it's a good start is just to admit that. You can't really make data that was collected in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, or in the 80s ethical, because at the source, there was large bias. If I could just go to the example of historical data from the United States, from the human rights movement, from those days, if we dump that data into the web, of course, it's completely unethical and there's no way to fix it. The only way is not to use it. So the dilemma is, what are we going to do? How are we going to accept this? Are we going to say this is going to delay technology advancements? The issue is how we are going to accommodate all this, because in the end, probably there's a developer looking at the data, no idea what the data is about, but also on the line there's an executive say, deliver me results. I want to see results. So it's quite a difficult issue, because technology is now being completely embedded in our social fabric. This is not about a machine talking with a machine. It's a machine talking with humans with effects that are unknown.
Yes, I totally agree with your point about the data, the historical data, because the risks of bias and the reproduction of stereotypes in AI, especially in search engines or virtual assistants, are real on ongoing ethical challenges. I agree with that. I have some suggestions from ethical point of view, because these systems, like I already say, are not neutral. They operate with data that reflects historical patterns, like you are saying, of discrimination and inequality. And for this reason, we need ongoing ethical strategies to mitigate these kind of failures. So from a theoretical perspective, we could approach this through different philosophical traditions, which would make for a fascinating conversation for sure. But in practical terms, it starts with something very simple, including people with disabilities and other underrepresented communities in the design projects, in technology development, and also in policy making. At least. Then, of course, we must talk about data. Systems must be trained with diverse and representative data sets across gender, ethnicity, disability, and other frequently marginalized factors. But don't get me wrong, but diversity alone is not enough. So we must also actively detect offensive or discriminatory language and prevent the model from amplifying harmful content. Sometimes we forget that the scale of the internet does not reflect the scales of real life, and that is a serious trap. Since many communities are underrepresented in online data and therefore risk being misunderstood, misrepresented, or ignored.
To your point about people being ignored and not represented on the internet, which is where the data's been scraped for these large language models, is really, talk about pictures of people with disabilities, right? There are far too few. They're just not represented on the images on the internet, right? And so what people are proposing often when there is this lack of diversity data is to create synthetic data, right? But there is also, as one of our former Access chat guests, Yuta Trevorana, said, synthetic data is just fake data, right? So how do now there may be use cases where you can create stuff that can help you shape things, but how do we deal with the ethical issues of making stuff up? Because the synthetic data is just making stuff up. So what are the ethical questions around making up data in order to try and address some of these historical underrepresentations in the data that's already prevalent on the internet?
This is a great question, and it's difficult to answer this question about synthetic data. What I can say that from the ethical perspective is that we need to balance sample methods. I know that this is not respond your question, because I can give you an ethical option, that is stress testing for ethical risks such bias, exclusion, or misclassification, and safeguards to ensure minority perspectives are not diluted in statistical noise. But this is not enough. And I know, and you probably also know this is not enough. When it's not possible to fully remove bias from training data, models usually must undergo rigorous audits and regular evaluations and real world testing with the diverse real users. You also need tools like customized instructions, the biasing methods, such as counterfactual data argumentation, and fairness-aware algorithms to detect and fix structural flaws. But all of this depends on one key condition: continuous human oversight. And AI systems should not be treated as autonomous or unquestionable entities. And this is a problem. And they must remain open to human intervention and contestation. We must ensure that systems learn from human feedback, adapt to the different contexts, and evolve over the time to improve inclusiveness. This brings us to the core of AI ethics. It's not enough to recognize the problems, of course. We must ensure this transparency, auditability, and accountability. And that means explaining how decisions are made, allowing human review, and making sure people can challenge automated outcomes.
Lia, I think that Neil and I must be on the same page today, because I guess all three of us are. But I had a question, but I find this a very interesting conversation that we're having, because once again, we've been working on ethics ever since we've just been working on it forever. And I said in the chat window, is it a synthetic output when all the data was programmed by humans? I don't know that answer. I just was thinking in my head, because once again, I get when it takes AI takes and it puts things together to make a picture or a graphic. Anyway, I just think we have a lot to explore as humans over the next few times. And Neil said over in the chat, how can we have human intervention and oversight when the speed of decision is making it so fast? And so just to bring that in too, Leah, you definitely need to come back on and talk about this again. But also I think the question I was going to ask was, but at the same time, AI, it seems like AI can also, AI for good can help us get our hands around the ethics, but we as human beings aren't always ethical. So it's just such an important conversation, but I'm just so glad we have brilliant people like you working on it, Leah, because it feels a little over my head still.
About this, I would love to come back and talk a little bit more about this. So I have a kind of an analogy, because when we are talking about these files and subjects, we are talking about real people. It's like when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, AI plays a paradoxical role. In fact, it can either promote accessibility or reinforce exclusion, depending how it's designed and implemented. Personally, I find it difficult to accept that digital accessibility is still seen as a technical requirement when it is in fact a matter of social justice. But this is my personal perspective. I mean, fundamental rights are not negotiable. This is what I think, but I know that I have other people that don't think like me, and this is the problem. This is why an ethical approach to AI must go far behind regulatory or technical compliance, because I must foster a permanent conversation about responsibility, social impact, because it is in these gray areas that most ethical failures emerge. For me,
Let me bring a kind of some provocative thoughts to think they don't necessarily relate with AI,
yeah.
but they relate with visibility. As an example, yeah, in the Portuguese television, people with disabilities have no visibility. There's no visibility of people with disabilities in the media. There's no visibility with people with disabilities in many startups environments around the world. So entrepreneurs, they don't really know who is a person with disability unless they have, for some reason, have a family related who has a disability, or if they themselves have a disability. The lack of visibility don't put these topics on people's heads. The other is we still have many people, many events around disability who are basically very close on themselves. People with disabilities talking with people. No, everybody knows the problem. That's it. Very few, the Web Summit, technology events, they very rarely approach the topic of disability and inclusion. So it's almost like uh, you don't really see it, so you don't really think, why should I take care of a problem that is not really part of something that is in front of me? I think this also relates with some of the conversation that we are having here as well. You don't see it. Why should AI ethics care about visibility?
This is tough, very difficult to approach, because is the same strategy for LGBT people. So if I don't see, it's not a problem. And is the mindset of the people that I usually I always ask for data, because when we have data, we know and we can add saying that give me your data, so you have a problem. But people prefer to say I don't have a lot of data about this. This is not a problem. And this is very curious, because data goes in hand with the issue of accessibility in companies, the business side. We know, according to the World Health Organization, more than 1.3 billion of people worldwide live with some form of significant disability. In Portugal, our data from last 2021 census shows that 10.9%, I think, of resident population aged 5 or over.
Yeah, but Leah, on that census, they made the change in relation to the previous census, and suddenly a large number of people with disability just disappears because they reframe the question.
Yeah, this is the problem. We know that a lot of the numbers don't correspond to reality. And this This data has ethical, social, and economical implications. If we want to build AI systems and ethical digital infrastructures, we must face these numbers and act with them, not these numbers that we have, because the numbers are a lot of bigger, and we know this. This is the business side. Just wanted to, I don't want to say this in a not appropriate way, but the question is innovation for whom? At the end of the day, entrepreneurs, if technology are not designed with accessibility in mind, we already know risk reproduction or even amplifying exclusion. But when we talk about, Antonio, about everyone, what we are saying when we talk about everyone, I don't mean an abstract or idealized public. I mean real diverse people with different bodies, literacies, geographies, lived experiences. So this is the problem. People with disabilities, racialized communities, LGBTQ, high A plus individuals, older adults, people with low digital access or digital literacy, and those living in rural or under connected areas. From an ethical statistical point of view, representativeness isn't just about counting heads, it's about ensuring that those historical underrepresented in data sets, testing panels, and policy rooms are not just visible but actively shaping the outcomes. So, for me, inclusion means asking who is missing from the data, who is excluded by design, who is not in the room when AI systems are not being developed, regulated, or deployed. So I think we can agree that representativeness is not a checkbox, is a kind of a commitment to intersectionality and how we share knowledge, distribute responsibility, and build the future.
Yeah. So that's a great point to end this on, because we've unfortunately reached the end of our half hour. It's been fascinating. We're definitely going to have you back. You know, thinking about who needs to be in the room, who needs to be represented. I need to thank Amazon and my clear text for keeping us on air, keeping us captioned. And thank you, Lia, for a fascinating conversation. Really thought-provoking stuff here. I look forward to this conversation continuing on social media. And please, just one last thing. Tell our guests how they can find you. So, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this conversation. I would be happy to come back whenever the opportunity arises. If anyone would like to continue this discussion, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share my contacts online with the EITIC site, or find me in LinkedIn. I'm always welcome to talk for people. So thank you so much. So the website is https://EITIC.xyz. Correct? Correct. Super. Thank you so much, and see you next time.